You're listening to Peachtree Corners Live with Rico and Rita, the weekly internet radio show keeping you current on the interests of the people, places, and politics in the city of Peachtree Corners. Be inspired, stay current, and be informed. Visit our website, peachtreecornerslife.com, for ways to listen to our broadcast live every week or download our podcast from iTunes.
Love the high-tech setup. This is great.
We're on Facebook Live, and this is the Peachtree Corners Live podcast with Rico Figliolini hosting, and a special guest today, Carolyn Bourdeaux, running for Congress, Georgia 7. She was fortunate enough, out of 5 candidates, a crowded field running in the primary, to be able to win that primary. And now she's going to be facing the incumbent Bob Woodall, this Congressman Bob Woodall, Republican. And so here today for the next 30 minutes, we're going to discuss a little bit about why you're running and how'd you get where you are.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. All right. So a little bit my background. I live with my husband and son in Swanee. Got a 6-year-old. I teach at Georgia State at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies, and sort of have spent most of my life in and out of different policy roles. I am running, and I tell folks there are 2 things that kind of pushed me into this, one of which is healthcare. And there are lots of dimensions to healthcare, but both of my parents actually passed away last fall, and all of their discretionary income was eaten up paying for my father's prescription medications. And he was not on any kind of exotic drug. He was a diabetic. And ended up paying, it was around $300 for a 10-milliliter bottle of Humalog. This is something you can purchase in Canada for $25.
Right.
And you just see one thing after the next in our healthcare system that is just badly messed up. So that's something. I've been looking for a platform, a way to be more involved as I've seen, all of these problems with healthcare unfold. The other thing that pushes me in is, candidly, the election of Donald Trump. I woke up on November 9th of 2016, and Donald Trump had been elected president. And I tell folks, that's proxy for a whole series of different issues. It's not him per se, but it's a lot of different issues. And, when I try to capture what that means, I believe in a country that is diverse, inclusive, global in its outlook and aspirations, not one that is racist, sexist, isolationist, and really backward-looking. So those are 2 big reasons I'm running.
I like the way you compacted that all together.
I've been trying to condense it, yes.
Very good. And Trump is the Trump in the room, and everyone, you either love him or hate him, or maybe some people love and hate him. And he's a difficult one to be there, because as a Democrat, you sort of want to attack him, I'm almost imagining, and totally everything that he stands for, maybe. But there are people that are Democrats that actually voted for him also. Yeah. And they voted for him, I think, because that change agent that they wanted. Right. So we are getting change.
Yes, we are.
Right? So, well, how would he would want Obamacare to self-destruct, essentially, under its own weight. Whatever he could do he said this, whatever he could do to let it collapse is what he would do. Woodall, as a congressman, has supported a bit of Trump's agenda.
Every step of the way. 97% of the time he votes with the president.
So what would you do different if the blue wave is real? Right. And if it's not, then there's other big issues that are going to be happening after November. But if the blue wave is real and Congress is controlled by the Democrats, are we going to be stuck and mired in impeachment, or are we going to really try to do something there in healthcare?
Right. So,
and immigration, maybe.
Well, my focus, I would say my top priority is healthcare. And I just want to be clear about how very, very, it's not just President Trump, it is the Republican Party under its current leadership and configuration has been extremely irresponsible in how it has handled health care in this country. We have a congressman who has voted at least 19 times to repeal the provision that requires insurance companies to cover people with pre-existing conditions. Further, there is a lawsuit right now led by Republican attorneys general to also repeal that provision protecting people with pre-existing conditions. And our congressman has said nothing about this. We have 110,000 people in this district without health insurance. And every vote he has taken would make that situation much, much worse. Worse for small businesses, worse for a host of people, tens of thousands of people in this district. So I just want to be clear, part of this is an incredibly irresponsible agenda that is being pushed forward. And I think the calculation is that by inflicting maximum pain on us, we will then reject the Affordable Care Act. The thing people need to know about the Affordable Care Act is it was never implemented the way it was intended. It was never funded. There was tremendous amounts of litigation against it. States that actually implemented the Affordable Care Act, like Massachusetts, have about 2% of their population uninsured. So a first step is to go back and actually implement it the way it was intended, including expanding Medicaid, which will cover 500,000 people more in this state, and then to introduce a public option to the exchange so that we have a low-cost option for health insurance that competes with the private options, provides an option for small businesses that are often really suffering because of the high health insurance rates, an option for self-employed people and others who need that kind of alternative.
But would that cover really what I'm self-employed, and I work a part-time job as well. I do a lot of freelance work, and I have to pay a decent amount of my health care has to be paid out. And if you're not in the network and God forbid something happens, you are stuck with a bill for sure.
Yeah.
But how can we fund this? I mean, recently, just with the what the feds decided to do to continue raising rates, and now the Republicans are talking about, well, we're in a deficit. All of a sudden now they've discovered this deficit, and now we have to deal with 70% of the budget is Medicare, health care. How do we fund it? How do we get to where you want to go, Carolyn?
Right. So the Affordable Care Act, when it passed, was fully funded. The Democrats actually did not run up the annual deficit or the overall debt to pay for it. They made sure that it was paid for. And what happened was that those funds then were never allocated to the healthcare system. And because those funds weren't allocated, it has caused our health insurance premiums to go up and up, and I'm sure you're experiencing that.
Yeah, sure.
I talk to folks who are paying $2,000 and $3,000 a month for health insurance, and that is crazy. So we have a system that was funded. We need to go back and implement it. Actually, something like the public option, I've seen a CBO scoring of that, and it would bring costs down because you have to realize that the Affordable Care Act right now subsidizes the purchase into the private insurers.
Right.
And if there is a public option competing with those private insurers, the projection is, and it's a very reasonable one, the private insurers will lower their costs.
So let me ask you how that would work a little bit with pharmaceuticals. The private companies can negotiate with the individual pharmacies on what medicines they want to carry and at what price they want to carry it.
Right.
With the public option, because the government's not allowed to negotiate that, I think, if I remember correctly.
That's correct. And Congress has passed legislation to explicitly prohibit the government from doing that.
Right. So would that change with the public option? That would have to change. Otherwise, there's no competition.
Yes. So the pricing of pharmaceutical drugs is sort of a somewhat separate but related issue. Currently, Congress has voted for no reason that I can understand, no good reason except that, I guess they are paying off the special interests that are supporting their congressional campaigns, has voted to prohibit Medicare from negotiating the price of prescription drugs in bulk using its purchasing power. So that's one thing to deal with. That's just the Medicare system, though, right? We still face extraordinary prescription medication prices, all of us who are not on Medicare.
Right.
And I think what we need to do there is to also empower either the states or the federal government to do kind of that bulk purchasing and negotiate those drug prices for us at scale. And that's what other countries do to bring down the price.
What about private companies? So you have, for example, I believe it's Amazon, Bezos, want to get into the health industry.
Yep.
And transparency, pricing, because it's not transparent right now. No one knows really what they're paying for that medicine. That retail value may be $1,000 for that pill, but depending on which company you go with, that pill may be $100, maybe $600. They may not even cover that medication. But private industry coming in could help that. Are there obstacles that can be removed to let them do that?
I think that, that is a very positive development that folks like Amazon, I think they're pairing with Berkshire Hathaway and some other groups to do that, right? And in essence, what they're doing is because they employ so many people, they are doing it like a government would, right? And
it's a little selfish on their part to a degree, but yes.
It's okay. I mean, that's great that they're doing it. We just need, someone to step in and intervene on behalf of all of us who are not employed by Amazon and by Berkshire Hathaway and those guys.
Right. So
Same concept.
Same concept. Okay. So as far as Democrats taking control, let's say they do take control of the House. Do you have their wherewithal to be able to do anything there enough? I think it's 50+1 to pass specific legislation still, but you have a president that may actually negotiate with the Democrats, it seems, because he may negotiate because he doesn't have a moral center to say, I'm a Republican through and through. Do you see that happening?
Yes. I think, one of the big hang-ups right now in this country to actually solving some of our problems is really a, very hard right coalition that has locked down the House of Representatives. And that needs to be broken up. Those folks need to know that they can't take votes like the one where they, remove the protections for people with pre-existing conditions and not face consequences. So that is, essential. What you see on the Senate side are all sorts of bipartisan solutions to health care. And the problem is the House won't pass them. And yes, I suspect the president can be persuaded. If we tell him, this is going to be the greatest, most wonderful, most amazing health care plan ever, we might get him to come along.
Yes. I wanted a study to be done of how many words he actually uses on an average day. But
it'll be huge.
Huge number. It's funny. I worked for Chuck Schumer when he was congressman for about a year, and then I became a Reagan Republican. So I've been on both sides of that, and he's a typical New Yorker to me. Yeah, and he's actually proving it out, which was what I was afraid of. We have a question or a comment, I guess, from Bud Harris.
Okay.
On the Massachusetts comment. His thing is Massachusetts has almost the highest tax rate in the nation, coupled with one of the lowest business and population growth rates. He says, want to emulate that?
That's simply untrue. That is simply untrue. In fact, I think it was General Motors. General Motors was looking for a place to locate. They were moving out of Connecticut, and they were considering Georgia and Massachusetts, and they went to Massachusetts. Massachusetts actually does not have the highest tax rate in the country. It's very much in the middle, and it has it's one of the highest growth rates in the country right now. Yeah,
that's what I thought too, but that's good. So, listen, this show's about putting out the facts, about getting out there. Sorry, Bud. But if you have other comments, feel free, comment on the comments box. Let's move it along a little bit. I know healthcare is a big issue for you, but let's move on to a few other issues, and let's talk a little bit about listen, money in politics. We could go there, but money in politics is on both sides of that fence.
Yep.
We have PACs on both sides. We have money that comes in. No matter how you adjust the law, water will go to the lowest, right, to the easiest place to go, and that's what money is like, in a way. How could we solve that?
Right. Well, let me just start out with talking about a bit about the problem here, which is that we have very, very large corporations that basically see their business model is not to go out there and produce value and do good things for you and me, but it's to send lobbyists to Washington, D.C. To lobby Congress to cut them special breaks, to give them monopoly power, and that's how they're making their money. It's just the cost of doing business is their payment to lobbyists and payment to campaigns. I recognize it is on both sides. That does not make it right. It is something that needs to be solved, and I think everybody sees this. I can walk into a Tea Party, meeting, and I can walk into the most left of the Democrats, and we can all agree that there is way, way, way too much money in politics, and too much money of a very selective special interest type. The current congressman received 60% of his funding in the last quarter from special interest PACs, and basically he just has a book of the Washington lobbyists. He goes down, he calls their numbers, and they cut him $5,000 checks. And that's how he raises his money. And that's how a lot of elected officials raise their money. That needs to change.
Yeah. It's raising money the way Obama did, let's say, or Sanders did later, getting small donations. That's difficult. That's a difficult way of doing that. And that's why PACs is, you're getting group rates with PACs, right? You're getting the bigger dollar and spending less money to get that dollar.
Yeah, the PACs have a very specific agenda, though, right? They're not just giving you that money. There's something that they want for that, and my biggest concern is, in particular, we have very large corporations that pour in tons of money into these elections. It's not just on the PAC side, though. Let's be clear. There's a whole independent expenditure side as well, the dark money that you hear everybody talking about. And, some wealthy individual, Sheldon Adelson, for instance, can cut a $30 million check and,
put that to a PAC or somewhere.
And he can just spend it, on supporting candidates. And so, it is very hard to run for office if you are not very wealthy or if you don't have very wealthy friends. And I don't think any of us think this is the democracy we should be having right now.
All right, so the next question for Matthew, thank you, Matthew, is how do you feel being an academic and a professor? Does that better prepare you for public service? And how does that work with what you just said, by the way? You're not a corporate CEO running or for a job like Bloomberg.
Right. That's interesting. So I have really gone back and forth between a sort of a teaching role, a consulting role, and actual working in public service. So in my early career, I was a legislative aide for several congressmen and a senator. I was director of Georgia's Senate Budget Office during the Great Recession and helped the state. I actually worked under the Republican leadership. So I've worked in a very bipartisan fashion my entire life to help balance the budget during the Great Recession. I did that. I founded the Center for State and Local Finance. I'm something of a... I'm an academic who likes to be out in the community doing work. And so most of what I've done, I do a lot of consulting. I write a lot of issue briefs. I'm trying to educate folks who are the next generation of leaders in public service. So I'd say it's very helpful in that I really do know a lot about public policy. I also know a lot about how you move legislation through a process.
So it's not just academics, it's actually hands-on, moving legislation through. Yeah,
I've really done, I've spent a lot of my life kind of in that in-between world. And that's really helpful. I mean, the challenge is, right, people like me usually don't run for office. And we don't have the money, we don't have the background. It is very hard to stand up a campaign from the background of a professor and public servant,
And to live, if you were to be elected, to live in Washington for a period of time, and it's not like a state house rep where it's maybe 2 months out of the year, 45 days. It's a full-time job. And people think it pays well, but it's after everything's said and done, it's
my husband's like, what's the cost of living in Washington? But I will say one other thing people should know is that I took an unpaid leave of absence from Georgia State to do this because I am paid through the state, and I wanted to make sure that there were no conflicts of interest when I ran, and that it was very clear, that I was off. And it is rare that someone has an opportunity in their lives to actually do something like that, and it just happened I had saved money to be able, by accident, and that made it possible.
Okay. And the support of your husband, obviously, and the family.
So my sweet husband, bless his heart. Yes.
Because if he didn't support you, this would be a tough...
Everybody should know that our house does not clean itself. Yeah.
All right. Carolyn, also universal preschool was another issue that you're on, and providing K through 12 teachers with well-funded salaries, and time maybe loan repayments to income is one part that you had on there on your website.
So I think we need to make sure we have world-class education, and doing that, part of that is moving towards universal pre-K, and that is something that a lot of research has shown will reduce the disparity between young children who are from low-income families and their parents are working a couple jobs and they just don't have the time to read to them and kind of help them in the way that families do that have more time and leisure to do it.
At what age level would that preschool start?
at 4. I mean, it'd be a four-year-old. But we do need high-quality childcare going all the way down. The challenge has always been that it's enormously expensive.
Yes.
And so that, I'm a budget person, I'm a fiscal person, we do have to find a way to fund that. And I'm still, looking around at that. But I think we need to start making progress towards that objective.
Okay. And with the repayment to income, the tying the loans repair, is that
right now that's more that's higher education, right? And I think some of the biggest issues we face, particularly in this community where we have very good K-12 schools, but part of it is we need to make sure that young folks are going in really ready to learn, and then our young folks that graduate can afford the higher education that they need. Right. Higher education is the path to upward mobility. It may not be college, it may be apprenticeships, it may be technical education, but nobody should have a ball and chain of debt around their ankle, hampering their ability to buy a home, to go out there and live their life because they have invested in getting a higher education.
So how would that work, tying the repayment to income?
Right. So some folks already do. There's some selected programs that already do this, but the basic idea is you shouldn't pay more than a certain percentage of your income in paying back the loan. Right. It's just sort of tagged to your income and your earnings, and it would be. It's going to depend. It's not graduate school. It's undergraduate, right? But to make sure that folks can get it, they can make the payments back in a reasonable way, and go on and do other things with their life as well.
Yeah. That's a whole nother discussion because to me, interest rates on that is another big issue.
You should be able to refinance. I don't know why you can't refinance your student.
Well, and I don't even know why the rates are so high to begin with. When money cost was zero back several years ago, and we're paying, I think it's almost 6-7% interest rate on that loan. Someone's making a lot of money.
Someone's making a lot of money. Yeah.
And it's okay to make money. We're a market economy, but ripping off students that just have to come out.
Well, what we do, right, is we require them to take out a certain type of student loan, and then we don't let them refinance it. And again, this goes to companies going to Congress to kind of rig the system so that they make a lot of money, and we just really have to. We have to have people who represent us, not, the big companies.
So how would you, there's been a winding down with a few things over the last 2 years. Trump has been in there. He almost doesn't care about certain things, doesn't care about the EPA, so he lets whoever influences him to nominate someone to the EPA, to the FCC, the net neutrality issue. They're unwinding a lot of we could say Obamacare era, but we could also say the Bush era, because Bush had regulations that were passed and in place. Also, those things are winding out also. How would a Democratic Congress go back in there and sort of fix things, if we can put it that way?
Right. It's interesting. I don't hear about the environmental issues as much as you'd think on the campaign trail, but it's a huge problem. And we can just start with the basic issues around climate change. And I have a 6-year-old son, and by the time he is 38 in 2050, scientists are projecting that 90% of the coral reefs will be dead.
Yes.
And that's an enormous challenge. I mean, that could affect whether we are alive as well.
Right.
And by the time he is in his old age, half of Florida will be underwater. And most recently, right, there's been a new report saying we have 10 years to get our act together to address these issues. So before it becomes irreversible. So there is a tremendous amount that needs to be done in reinstating policies that we had in place. A lot of the pollution that contributes to global warming, but also to asthma, poisoning the air we breathe, was something that we've been trying to address through increasing the fuel efficiency standards for automobiles. The Trump administration has gotten rid of that. There's a whole issue around power plant emissions and whether they can spew mercury into the air and other really dangerous toxins. And there was a rule about that, and the Trump administration has pulled back on that. And those are things that the Congress needs to reinstate.
You know what's interesting? Trump doesn't have an ideological bent with the Republican or Conservative Party. So he can do other things that sort of make sense. The ethanol regulation, where they're not allowed to produce more ethanol during the summer, which is supposed to help reduce carbon emissions and lower the issue with climate. But there's an economy to that, So the corn growers love this, and that's fine. So that's a good thing that he's doing. and so that's why it's almost like, to me, it's like you have some bad things and then you have a few good things in there.
Right. Where he's good, I'm with him. But where he's wrong, we have to stand up.
Okay. Bob Woodall's been in office since 2011, I believe. He was the congressional aide to the previous congressman.
Right.
So he inherited the seat, let's call it, because he knew the players and everyone, and he ran and he has it. He's been a quiet legislative person, they say, which to me means that not much has happened when you say quiet.
Right.
And I haven't seen much, actually. And some of the things that I know Woodall takes credit for is very broad stroke stuff. I don't see any legislation per se. How can you, what do you see that you could do better, that he hasn't done? And let's say more for the congressional district rather than nationwide.
Right. So one of the interesting things was when I worked for Ron Wyden from Oregon, and he is actually considered to be, right now he's in the Senate, is considered to be one of the most effective senators that we have in this country. Our current congressman is not done an awful lot. And so when I worked for him, I learned how you can really do a lot of things, on the ground. I worked for him when he was in the House through a congressional office. There are a bunch of things. First of all, we need transit. And transit comes about not just because of the local efforts and, the sales tax that they're going to pass, but typically, when you fund transit, you have a federal partner, so you bring in some money from all over the country to help support that project. And we need a vigorous advocate if we want to bring transit into this area, a vigorous advocate at the federal level.
Woodall hasn't been there.
Nothing. So what Woodall has actually done is, for several years, he co-sponsored legislation to end any federal role in transportation funding. So what this would mean is that we have been sending our taxpayer dollars all over the country to fund, transit in California and, Massachusetts and New York and Washington, D.C., and we've not had any come back to us. And now when it's our turn, it would, we're not going to have a federal role anymore. So it's kind of our turn to be an advocate for that kind of funding and to bring it in. And I would say that's, really going to help economic development in this area as well.
Is that a philosophy, though? I mean, I've lived here since '95, and water has always been an issue, for example, in Gwinnett County.
Right.
No one wants water in Gwinnett County. They don't want mass transit here. Even the bus system that eventually came about, you had to really look hard to see where the bus stops were because the signage was so poorly done.
Right.
It was almost as if we have it, but we don't have it.
Right.
And they didn't want to encourage people to use it or come into the county.
Right. Well, now that's a problem, right? We are losing business. We have a soul-sucking commute in this area.
Yes.
And it's funny. I can't get even reporters, to come up and cover the race because nobody wants to sit on 85 and be in, people don't want to be involved in this community, and that includes businesses. So we lost NCR and West Rock, to other parts of the metro area because they wanted to be near transit. If you look at where property values are increasing, right, it is around transit in places that are accessible to that. So I think what people were concerned about before has kind of been turned on its head, and now we need transit in order to be economically successful, in order to support quality of life issues.
I keep thinking of the Long Island Railroad where I grew up. Long Island was considered very Republican. Suffolk County, Nassau County. Long Island Railroad, I mean, you could go into the city instead of driving in the city, and that makes sense to me like that.
Yes, absolutely.
We are almost at the half-hour mark.
Okay.
And I appreciate you giving me your time like this morning, this afternoon. So why don't you tell everyone, give them a two-minute elevator speech of, if you will, of why they should vote for you and where they can find out more information.
Okay. All right. So just in brief, and then kind of summing up some of the stuff we just talked about, I am running because every person needs quality, affordable health care. I am running because we need world-class education. We need transit. We also need someone who is going to be a check on the president. Now, where we have agreement, I can work with him. But there are a lot of areas where I think things are going badly awry. We also need to get rid of the special interest money in Congress. And I am very committed to campaign finance reform, to rolling back Citizens United, which really has allowed unlimited corporate spending in our campaigns. So these are all things that I am very committed to. Going back to my previous statement, I believe in a country that is diverse, inclusive, global in its outlook and aspirations, and I want every single mother and father in this district to wake up and be excited about their future and the future for their children.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for being here. We're going to wrap this up, but I want to let you know that at 3:30 today, this afternoon, I'm going to have 2 high school kids from GMSMT, if I have that right, founders of the Taste of Gwinnett, or 2 of several founders of that group, and they'll be talking with me about what they're doing with that and how they're raising money for Relay for Life. Next week, Lynette Howard is my guest at 8:30 p.m. from my home office. We're going to do a podcast there about her race for county commission in Gwinnett County. And then Brian Johnson, actually noon that day on the 25th, will be with me to discuss the city in prime lunchtime with Brian Johnson. So thank you, guys. I appreciate you being out with us.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Peachtree Corners Live with Rico and Rita. Check out our Facebook page. Download the Spreaker radio app for Apple, Android, and Windows devices, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at PeachtreeCornersLive.com.